Yo, what is up everyone? I'm back here with another video. This will be the last video before I'm back home, actually. I don't know when it's going up. This might be the first or last one. I spent all night before visiting Sierra recording a bunch of videos, so you guys would have videos to watch while I was gone. Originally, it was going to be for all 7 days. But I ended up recording on Battle Spot, and literally the audio balance was so messed up that like it was better to not show it than it was to show it. So we ended up not doing that. But we are going to be kind of what's it called, discussing the top 5 restricted pairs in this video, right? So pretty much going through what I think are the best restricted pairs and kind of explaining why I think so, and kind of bringing that list to you guys. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. So we're going to start from number 5 to number 1. For number 5, it's actually going to be Caloric Shadow and Groudon. I was kind of debating between whether or not I wanted Caloric Shadow and Groudon or the what's it called, Calyrex Ice and Kyogre team, because realistically both of them have been doing decently, especially more in terms of like ladder and like certain tournaments. That being said, I do think that Groudon and Calyrex have the edge in terms of viability and what they can do. They had a bit better performances all around, so it was worth noting. So there are 2 versions of this team that are very popular right now. The first off is the Thundurus, Charizard, Incin, and Gastrodon version. This version is more centered around leveraging the offense of your Charizard and Max Groudon to kind of get some more offense going, and then having a Wisp Calyrex that can kind of disrupt the opponent. That's basically the main focus there. Now, this archetype is pretty strong because it kind of gives you a great way to take advantage of Groudon's Sun, so you can abuse it with your partners. Meanwhile, the other version of this team, having Thundurus and Venusaur, pretty much taking advantage of 2 other strong maxes, and then having Grimmsnarl and Incineroar support. It's two of the strongest support Pokemon in the entire game, right? So it kind of makes sense here. Overall, I'd say that this pair is pretty consistent as a whole. They offer a lot to each other, pretty much being able to spam spread moves that kind of complement each other. You know, Astro Barrage hitting basically everything that Precipice Blades cannot, and vice versa. The only exception being Yveltal, right? But like, you have other options on your team to deal with Yveltal usually, so that kind of works out. Yeah, that's pretty much the main idea with the team, and what I think is pretty cool about it. As well, too, what I think is really interesting about this build is like how the Sash Calyrex really changes up a lot of these teams. The fast Will-O-Wisp support is really cool, along with the ability to like continuously go for damage and kind of support your Groudon as well there. So just a really cool team overall. I think has a lot of unique ways you can kind of work with it, and that's just like a really like nice, I think, start off to like the pairs. So next off is going to be number 4. So number 4 is actually going to be Palkia and Zeishin. So Palkia and Zeishin are a really interesting archetype because they actually really support each other typing wise. I mean, if you look at all of Zeishin's weaknesses, ground, fire, and then I think it's only ground fire, right? Ground fire, yeah. Palkia resists one of those and then takes the other one neutrally, and realistically, like, Palkia snipes ground types anyways with its water coverage. Then you have Palkia, which is weak to fairy moves, which Zacian can swap into. It's also weak to dragon moves, which Zacian can also swap into. So it's just pretty busted overall, right? Like, it's a really good typing combination. Not to mention that they both complement each other on the special attacking and physical attacking side, because you have steel, fairy, and fighting coverage on one end, and then you have water, dragon, and ground coverage on the other. It's very hard to swap into. If like swap into both of them, especially when they're both on the field and they both exert a lot of offense, one capitalizing on the max and the other one capitalizing on just being Zacian, right? So that's just like a really cool way that they exert offense together. They kind of are very synergistic in the way. A couple of builds that are typically common with these is Gothitelle builds involving stuff like Ditto, Rillaboom, support Thundurus, right? That's one of the builds that ended up doing pretty well. Got that right here. And then the other builds that you can utilize are the more flexible ones, kind of using Thundurus as a more offensive staple, right? So we see like offensive Thundurus, you see Incineroar, Amoonguss, and like those kind of builds. Now, For me personally, I feel like Palkia has a lot of room for development. There are different ways you can build around it. It's just kind of tricky starting out with it because it feels like you're kind of shoehorned in the same builds. But if you can find the right unique way to work with it, I think it can do a lot of good and it can do a lot of unique things. So just super cool Pokemon as a whole. I think it has a lot of potential, and yeah, it's just a super dope mon. Definitely worth like looking more into in my opinion. And then we go over here to what's it called? Like look at the pair again. The last thoughts I have about it pretty much is just that you really get that special offense to offset Zacian's physical offense, you know, or not offset it, but like kind of balance it out. Really pressures Incineroar as well. So just a really cool combination. I think has a lot to offer. And they really do complement each other super well. Now, I will say for number 3 and 4, they're pretty much tied. The next pair I was going to put is actually Yveltal and Zeishin. So Yveltal and Zeishin, really strong combination together because they really complement each other. Yveltal is really good into basically every other restricted except for Zacian, right? And then like it can beat Zacian in certain situations. So kind of a cool concept overall and like a good pairing of restricteds, right? Similar to Palkia, they kind of complement each other well. With Yveltal being weak to, ice and being weak to fairy moves, Zacian can swap into those. The only thing you can't really swap into is electric moves, which is neutral. Zacian's weak to ground moves, which Yveltal can swap into. Also, they both match up neutrally into Kyogre, which is nice, and typically they have a partner that's going to support them pretty well, right? So, overall, pretty cool pairing. The most common build you'll typically see is the Gastrodon build that I won with because it has just been the most consistent in terms of performance, along with the one I got number 1 with. It's just a good team overall. I mean, it's pretty much opted around being as consistent as possible. And the screens with Zacian and Yveltal is just very strong, right? The other version that ended up doing well in another tournament was a Lapras version utilizing offensive Lapras and offensive Regieleki. Like Clay Lapras to set screens, and then you had Incineroar and Amoonguss as well to kind of offer support for the team. Then the final version of the team that's been seeing a bit of popularity is the Rillaboom version. You could do like Rillaboom support version. And that's been popular as well, right? So a bunch of different variations of the team. You can kind of see that it's a bit flexible as well. And as we kind of progress, the best teams are going to have a lot of flexible options and ways you can build them, right? So we've kind of gone through 3 teams. As you saw, like 5, was kind of trickling behind the other ones. And we had 4 and 3 kind of tied. So now you guys are probably like, okay, well, it's some other archetype than it's Kyogre Zacian. But do I have a surprise for you? So I actually think the second best archetype in the format is Kyogre and Zacian, and I'm going to explain why. So yes, through sheer consistency and use, it is the best in terms of like being splashable, being able to be used on like a lot of different compositions. However, if you look at its win rate in comparison to the archetype that's ahead of it, it's actually worse. And I think that we're going to see the other archetype ahead of it kind of overtake. Obviously, we'll need to see as the meta progresses if this stays true. But I do think that Kyogre Zacian is still really consistent and can definitely make a run for number 1. Like 1 and 2 are very close. So with Kyogre Zacian, there are a couple different builds you can have with it. Typically, the main builds you'll see are the Rillaboom builds with Zapdos, Grimmsnarl, and then Seismitoad, right? So this is one of the builds. This build biases towards no fire type, allowing you to kind of just bias into what makes range strong using Seismitoad, powered up Power Whips with Rillaboom, Airstream for Kyogre with both Zapdos and Seismitoad, and 2 centralized max options, and then support with Grimmsnarl. The other way this team is used is pretty much with kind of a random grass type between Amoonguss or Venusaur, right? Then having Incineroar, right? Oh, sorry, Venusaur, and then Incineroar, right? So like this is another standard build. You can also cycle out the Venusaur with an Amoonguss depending on your preference of the team. Another version as well of this specific team, and this just shows you how many versions of the team exist, right? Utilize Whimsicott along with Zapdos. Now, the one thing you can notice is that Zapdos is kind of a staple on majority of these teams, mostly because of its ability to just kind of work well, I feel like, with these Pokemon. But yeah, you can see another version that Paul Ruiz used to get second place had this. And then finally, the last version that I wanted to discuss, because I found that it was pretty interesting as well, is actually the Thundurus versions of the team with like Amoonguss and Incin, right? So like Thundurus, Amoonguss, and Incineroar, right? Actually, not the last. I kind of lied. This is another version of the build. You typically see these teams like have to have an electric types. like to have their electric types, I should say. And then finally, if we're looking at, you know, obviously the pair as a whole, there is a standard Tornadus build, and typically the Tornadus build will use Zapdos as well. So, you know, you can kind of see how a lot of these teams like to have that electric type, or a lot of the Swordfish teams like to have the electric type. I'm sure there are builds that can work without it, but primarily they will be biased towards that electric type. So that's just something worth noting. But overall, super cool archetype. I think it has a lot of potential, as always, and I'll continue to do well throughout the course of the season. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, for number 1, we're going to keep Zeishin right here, because Zeishin obviously is going to be on the number 1 archetype. But we're going to add Caloric Shadows. So Caloric Shadows Zeishin is something that I didn't think would actually be that good immediately. I actually thought it was kind of bad immediately, but the more I've seen it, the more I've grown to appreciate it. So the reason why I think it's one of the best archetypes, or the best archetypes right now, is if you look at it on Limitless and combine all the tournament statistics, Caloric Shadow and Zeishin has the best matchup spread by far. Like, it has beaten the most archetypes by far in like a favorable matchup, like 50 to 60% for majority of them, right? And the only ones it really struggles with is like typically the Yveltal plus Steel type compositions, which kind of makes sense, right? But like, you can even tech for that. Now, there are a couple versions of these teams that I find really interesting. The bulkier versions are kind of cool too. Some like to go with the more standard, like Thundurus, Incineroar, Rillaboom, Gastrodon core, right? That's one that did super well. Then you have the other ones that bias a little more towards offensive capabilities with Whimsicott. So you kind of have a couple cool options there, right? And then there's like one other version that typically uses Blastoise, Regieleki, Rillaboom, and Incin, right? So a couple of options there. Overall, kind of a cool team. Now, the one thing worth noting is that typically, depending on the version you use, there's typically always a weakness to a certain kind of team. I feel like Yveltal Zeishin has pretty good matchups into Zeishin Calyrex, or like not really good, but like the Calyrex player definitely has to outplay the Yveltal player, and the Yveltal player doesn't have to work as hard necessarily to get the win, whereas the Calyrex player and is really gonna have to work hard. The nice thing is because you have Zeishin and Thundurus, you can typically just leverage those. You're not even forced to bring your Calyrex, so kind of a nice option there. But overall, kind of cool archetype as a whole. I really think it definitely deserves the number 1 spot. I can see a lot of potential coming from this archetype and a lot it can do. So I would definitely expect this to at least win 1 tournament or 1 regional, as long as I don't win, right? Because I do use Yveltal, right? But no, yeah, it's definitely interesting. You know, I would definitely expect to see a team like this succeed or like do well. So it'd be cool to see a team like this continually kind of pop up. I think it's just a really good archetype in general. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the top 5. So obviously, if you guys need a recap, I actually have the sheet right here. So we have Zeishin Caloric Shadow, number 1. Number 2, Kyogre Zeishin. Number 3, Yveltal Zeishin. Number 4, Palkia Zeishin. And then finally, Caloric Shadow and Groudon. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys haven't already, please make sure to check out the Patreon and make sure to check out coaching if you guys would like to improve your skills. Thank you guys so much for the support. I incredibly appreciate it. This is actually going to be the video that comes out first. I just realized at the end of this. So you guys can expect a video every other day until I'm back from Canada. Originally, I was planning to get all 7 days done, but like I had to delete footage. There was a bunch of audio issues, so I had to fix that stuff. But once again, guys, thank you for all the support. I incredibly appreciate it. I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.